Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Good Ole Podcast. I'm Jacquie Franciulli for Wahoo's 24/7. And it's nice to be back, not only because of football season, but also to having a new episode of the pod again on Wahoo's 24/7 and wherever you listen to your podcast, and also on YouTube. I kind of told myself that I didn't want to start off the podcast until I can really dedicate it for one a week episodes. And if you're a subscriber to Wahoo's 24/7, you know that I've been having some health issues over the last few months, since probably halfway through last football season. But now that I officially had a diagnosis of lupus, I've been able to kind of get just adjusted and know where my limits are during the season. And I figure once a week I can do a pod, probably every Thursday, which is when this will drop today. So I'm excited to get back to a routine of having Virginia football back in our lives. So yeah, UVA football kicks off the season against Richmond. And obviously the big news coming from the weekend is that Anthony Colandrea is going to be the starting quarterback, winning the quarterback battle over Tony Muskett. Tony Elliott and the staff coming into their third year into from being in the program. They have their starting quarterback. If you ask around the program, everyone will tell you this is your first true off season of being in the program, where they can focus on football, they can focus on getting stronger, they can focus on the football part of things. And there's definitely that type of energy when you see the football team. Now, Tony Elliott did talk to the media on Tuesday. It was his first game week press conference, which means it was a first opportunity to see what this team will look like, because during fall camp, there was a lot of position battles happening on the field. So in the depth chart this week, there are some changes. Now, obviously, there are certain positions that we expected guys to start. Obviously, the starting 5 offensive linemen from last year all returning, anchored by Brian Stevens at center. Some of the guys that have made notable movements on the depth chart include Jack Whitmer, who's right behind Mikhail Boley at left tackle. And then you have Ugonna Nana at left guard. We saw him a lot of times kind of switching over with Ty Furnish over at right guard. And Charlie Patterson is behind Ty Furnish, currently at right guard. But Stevens had mentioned to us during his media availability on Tuesday that he said that Ugonna Nana and Ty Furnish are also competing a little bit at that right guard position. Jimmy Christ is behind Blake Steen at right tackle. And Grant Ellinger, one of 3 true freshmen on the depth chart, is behind Brian Stevens at center. He enrolled in January, and he was a guy that has been playing a lot of different roles since his arrival on grounds, and he certainly made a point to be a guy that could follow Brian Stevens if for some reason Stevens weren't able to play or needed a 1 or 2 snaps out, a helmet came out, or just, something was going on. So Grant Ellinger is number 2 at center. And obviously Ty Furnish also has experience at that position as well. Well, Noah Josie also cross-trained. Kind of going through the depth chart here. Other guys of note in the depth chart that might be a little bit different last year. Obviously no Malik Washington, but no surprise. Chris Terry is number 1 in the slot position, followed by Sadarian Harrison. Tro Harris, he's number 1 opposite Malachi Fields. And that's actually something that Greg Madia and I will be talking later on in the show too, since Trell Harris, I think, is going to be the most underrated player on the team as far as the offensive side. And I think he's going to be the one that could have a breakout year for UVA. And then we see the tight end room a little bit different this year. Obviously, familiar name in Sackett Wood, but 2 transfers, Tyler Neville and Sage Ennis listed. Then on the defensive side, this is where you have a lot of veterans, including Cam Butler and Chico Bennett. The big story there is Ben Smiley is not on the list. Tony Elliott mentioned that he is practicing but has been hurt. So Billy Kudelka is listed behind Chico Bennett at Bennett. And then Terrell Jones is listed behind Camp Butler at the end. Jewett Hayes is another guy to kind of know in that position. Bryce Carter is also hurt, which is why he's not on the depth chart as well. Any big battles happened in the secondary with Kempton Shine and Kendron Smith at one corner, at left corner, and then Jap Jackson and Dre Walker at right corner. The safeties kind of aligned what we expected, with Jonas Sanker, Antonio Clary leading in, kind of starting with Corey Thomas or Malcolm Green. Malcolm Green kind of fighting for that spur row. He started off when he transferred from Clemson at Clemson, moved into that spur position. And him and Kendron Smith are going to be one of those versatile guys that can fit in both positions. And I think Virginia will utilize that. Kind of depends on the package, too. I mean, even Corey Thomas, he can play close to the box if necessary. And then I mentioned 3 true freshmen. I had 2 that I mentioned with Billy Kodelka and Grant Ellinger. The final true freshman that's on the depth chart is Ethan Minter, an in-state playmaker from Thomasdale High School out in the 804. Ethan was a quarterback. He came to Virginia in the spring, adjusted to his new role at safety, and he's been doing really well. I feel like in the spring, one of my last podcasts I discussed, Ethan Minter has been kind of raising a few eyebrows because he was someone that came in to learn a new position and has done really well. So that's kind of like the big emphasis on the depth chart leading into the season. Obviously, Virginia starts at home against Richmond in what would be the UVA strong game, and fans are encouraged to wear orange during that game. And it'll be the first home game at Scott Stadium since they had a lot of updates. And actually on Wahoo's 24/7, later on Thursday, I will have a story with Eric Ward, who is the Associate Director of Marketing at Virginia, and he'll be breaking down all the changes that are coming to Scott Stadium for those of you who are attending a home game. So that's coming up on Wahoo's 24/7. And it's more than just the big Jumbotron video screen and the sound system. Obviously, those are big things, but there's also more changes that are expected for Scott Stadium coming this Saturday. But obviously, the big news is Anthony Colandrea being named the starter. And from talking to several different people, either during fall camp or even on Tuesday and Wednesday when we had media availabilities leading to Richmond, one key thing is Anthony Colandrea is more mature, and his leadership skills are some of the things that put him over the top for this competition.
AC's had a lot of growth. I mean, I think that comes from, moving from a freshman to sophomore. It comes with maturity. When you're going to play, you got to grow up a little bit more than maybe your friends not going to play. From him, he's been great. He's taken the situation. Him and Tony have been, wonderful through this process. They're their biggest supporters too. I'm ready to back both of them if we need that too. But AC's shown, that he can be the dude.
Some of the things we talked about all camp, pocket presence with the ball, right? There's a time and a place for throwing away, right? Missing in the right spot, right? That accuracy, things that we chart. And that's where he showed a lot of growth in this fall camp.
What I've noticed is he's a lot more conscientious, when he pulls it down the run, of keeping it high and tight. And then also from a decision-making standpoint, just not some of those plays that he just, he feels like he wants to pull the trigger. He's being a lot more conscientious and understanding, the situation that sometimes it's better to just pull the ball down, throw it away, or run, get 4 yards, get down, as opposed to putting the ball into jeopardy by throwing it into coverage.
I think he's always kind of been a little bit more of a vocal guy. I think he's kind of embracing that role a little bit more. Being a sophomore, sometimes it's hard to just step in and lead, but I think guys respect him, and he's taken that respect and really done something with it.
Obviously, you heard from Brian Stevens and you heard from Elliott and Kitchings there. So this is a good time for us to kind of put the brakes a little bit on the episode while we take a quick break, because on the other side, we'll invite Greg Madia of the Daily Progress to talk about Virginia football and the season ahead. And welcome back to the Good Ole Podcast. Jacquie Franciulli for Wahoo's 24/7. And just like I promised, at the other side of the break, Greg Madia is joining us. Greg, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, Jacquie, happy to be with you. Season's getting closer.
I can't believe it, Greg. We are finally here. Feels like we've been talking about this season a lot more. A lot of exciting things to discuss about Virginia when you look at the roster and the potential progress this team will be able to show.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It's exciting though. Big season ahead. for Virginia. Important season in Tony Elliott's third season as the head coach coming up. So should be interesting and a season that Virginia fans should be excited for.
Well, obviously, we have to start with the big news coming from the weekend. Tony Elliott made the decision to go with Anthony Colandrea over Tony Muskett as week 1 starter. Now, Greg, I don't know if I would say this was a surprising decision, because we both mentioned it, that it felt like Anthony Colandrea was the quarterback that had the most momentum after last season and even heading into spring practice. Tony Muskett was hurt, had shoulder surgery, and then returned to spring practice a little earlier than expected, and then ended up having a pretty solid spring and a very solid spring game. So when you head to the offseason, there was still this belief that Anthony Colandrea was in a slight lead, but at the same time, you still thought that the momentum had switched a little bit, and maybe Tony Muskett, with him being healthy, with him being the veteran, with him being older, that he might have been a little bit, maybe a sliver ahead. Then when you entered into fall camp, it seemed like things kind of evened out between both of them, and they had a competition between them. I guess it was a surprising pick, but not really.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You thought if it would be tight and the older guy was still playing well enough that it might be the older guy. And if you think back to the spring, Tony Muskett had that great spring game. Take it for what it's worth, right? It's a glorified scrimmage in front of the fan base, but he played well. 200 passing yards, 2 touchdowns in that spring game with the glimpse. But there are a lot of factors, right? And I think you look at a few things with Colandrea. He had the momentum coming out of last season into the off season because of how he played. He threw for the most passing yards of any true freshman in the Power 5. He threw for 13 touchdowns. He had the 9 interceptions, but he had some games where he played really well, particularly I think back to James Madison, the game week 2 last year. He played really well at Louisville, even though Virginia lost the game. And then I thought he played really well in that game they beat Duke in November. So he had some games where you thought, all right, this young player has some potential at the position. And then you kind of look at the offseason as a whole. Last year, Tony Elliott, kept it and maintained that even though Colandrea was playing, Muskett was the starter. Colandrea was the backup, right? That was the gist of it. Even when Colandrea was playing pretty well late last season, going into the offseason, though, that's when the competition began, and it was a true, jockeying for that top job. Colandrea, he had the momentum, like you said, and I took that into the spring. Played really well. And I think back to some leadership type things. He had that Florida trip that he led, taking some of the skill guys back to his home state of Florida. New players like Chris Tyree and Trell Harris and Andre Green, and as well as returners like Malachi Fields and Cedarian Harrison. They all went down to Florida to work on throwing and catching, hanging around, being around each other. Colandrea, even in December, right, was a guy spearheading some of the recruiting efforts. I know you know that well, Jackie, right, with Tyree and some of the transfers and being vocal about it. So I think you throw some of those things in and it makes sense, even though it seemed like when UVA brought Tony Muskett to ACC kickoff that maybe the job could be his still. So fascinating. And I think the big thing for Colandrea, Jackie, was we were told all throughout training camp that he had to reduce the turnovers. He had to be smarter with the football. He couldn't force the big play when the big play wasn't there. He must have done that, right? Yeah, I think it's paramount on this team, because you look at what they have, and it's an older, experienced group in all the right places too, Jackie. The defensive line, the offensive line, whoever wins the quarterback job, and that's still playing out. And maybe there'll be a decision sometime soon. Whoever wins the quarterback job has started games at Virginia before. There's experience in the secondary. Like, there's experience at the places that most college football teams desire to be experienced in. And I think you mentioned Cam Butler. There's Chico Bennett too. There's Jameer Carter. You're talking about a 7th year, a 6th year, and a 5th year player on that defensive line. And there were high expectations for that group a season ago. but because of the injuries, it never materialized to what Virginia wanted it to look like. And there's hope this year with Chico Bennett fully healthy. He played through his injuries last year, and Cam Butler back. And talking to him too, he could have thought about the NFL. So could have Bennett, but they decided it'd be in their best interest to return, try to boost their stock a little bit. So you have guys who are motivated too to play really well this coming fall for other reasons, but also in the sense to help turn this Virginia program around. I think there are players who've been in the program a long time, and then you've got other players who were brought in by this staff and feel like it's their responsibility to help turn the tide for Tony Elliott and these coaches, so to speak. So I think there's different motivating factors in play for this group to get it right and set Virginia in the correct direction.
Calandra did a really good job in the offseason, making sure to get excitement in that locker room. The locker room is bought in. We heard from Brian Stevens early on in the show saying that he was the dude and the maturity level that he has grown into, and just the way he's approached everything. And Brian Stevens even mentioned that he has this energy about him, that he's able to motivate the guys around him. So sometimes it is those intangibles. Anthony Calandra is obviously a very talented playmaker and obviously a talented quarterback. But the big thing is sometimes as a quarterback, you have to have those intangibles. And that's what AC at the end kind of nudged him over in that quarterback competition. And now he's a veteran. I mean, this is his second year. He's a sophomore. He's smarter about the game. He understands a little bit about college football, playing in the Power 4 conference. So it is different going to year two. And honestly, he understands his role now. I mean, last year he did not expect to play in Nashville against Tennessee. That was not on his bingo card last year. He wasn't expecting to start most of those games that he did. Tony Muskett was hurt and he was kind of thrown under the fire. So this year it's very different for Anthony Calandra because he is able to mentally wrap around his brain, and it's different off season, right? Different way of prepare. So this is going to be a more mature AC moving forward. Now, I mentioned he's got more experience. I mean, Virginia football entirely has more experience when you look from top to down on that roster. On the defensive side, Coach Rodzinski, I think one of his quotes in the offseason, we had 1,400 snaps with true freshmen last year. When you look down, not only do those true freshmen now have experience, but you bring in veterans. These guys that are in their mid-20s, they're grown men. I mean, Cam Butler's coming into his third year. Chico Bennett is coming back. You got Jameer Carter, who decided to come back. Obviously, you have guys that are the true freshmen that have gotten experience, like Jason Hammond. But then you've got older guys in the secondary, like Jonas Sanker. Antonio Clary is healthy. You've got transfers that have that older experience coming as well, like Corey Thomas Jr., So on the offense, you have Tyler Neville, Sage Ennis, two tight ends that transfer. So this is an old veteran group. But in particular, on that defensive side of the ball, Greg, that defensive line is a old veteran group, especially that first team when you consider Jason Hammond, Jameer Carter inside with Cam Butler and Chico Bennett on either side. And even inside at that defensive tackle position, you have Michael Diatta and Anthony Britton, although Anthony Britton has not played in games very much. He redshirted last year. He has done well in the weight room and is someone that the staff has full confidence in. So you do have guys that has at least have some game reps or is someone that Virginia has really been excited about. Now, at defensive end, that's the only area that I have concern as far as depth because of injuries. Mekhi Buchanan is out for the year. Bryce Carter should be back at some point in the next few weeks. But you are very thin at defensive end.
Yeah, I think that's fair with the defensive line, particularly on the edge. And I think that's totally fair. At linebacker, I'm not as worried with their depth. I think Dorian Jones is an older, established veteran who started at two different Power 4 programs in Louisville and Cincinnati and has been around college football long enough to where he'll pick up the defense eventually. And I know there are some other players there that might make a name for themselves. Trey McDonald's been okay in training camp. But I think after those three and Robinson, Jackson, and Dorian Jones, you could see Corey Thomas who's a defensive back. I think their depth is a little bit better in the defensive backfield than at linebacker. He's been trained, Corey Thomas, as a will linebacker too. So I think you could see him at times, particularly in passing situations, play some linebacker for the Cavaliers. The defensive backfield, because I don't think Jonas Sanker is going to come off the field. You don't have to worry about, unless he gets hurt, you don't have to worry about as much depth at safety when you have Clary and you have Caleb Hardy, who started last year. I know Kempton Shine's gonna be kind of the extra defensive back hybrid type player on the field. But Malcolm Green can play there. He can play some other spots too in the defensive backfield. And I know Kiki Adams has had another freshman has had a strong camp, though you probably don't want to go to the freshman if you don't have to. So I think their depth in defensive backfield is a little better, which could allow Corey Thomas to slide down and play some linebacker if need be. It's not too different from what they envisioned with Lex Long. Just Lex Long couldn't do it and couldn't stay healthy. And I think Corey Thomas, with his size, 6'4", rangy type player, can rush the pass, can play against the slot, can make tackles in the box. I think he's that versatile athlete that John Radzinski has been searching for, which really could help this defense.
And I know when we discuss veterans, Cam Butler is often one of the guys that gets a lot more attention. Obviously, I mean, if you look at last season, he had 3.5 sacks in 4 games, and then he was injured against NC State, and he led the team in sacks even after that injury. So it's fair to say why he's getting most of that kind of publicity on the defensive side of the ball. But I think one of the guys on defense that doesn't get enough publicity or is just Antonio Clary. Obviously, Jonas Sanker is one of the best DBs and safeties coming back. But Antonio Clary was hurt last year, and I feel like he was missed. Cam Butler described him as the gel in the back, the glue, because he was one of those guys that undersees kind of the field, and he's able to communicate with guys up front and really tell them what's going on. And Antonio Clary is a very vocal DB in the back, and that's something that Cam Butler mentioned that they missed a lot. So having that veteran voice back there is certainly going to make an impact, especially to a DB room has more depth to it. When you look at that cornerback position where they're able to bring in guys like Kempton Shine and Jam Jackson and Kendron Smith, but also when you have Corey Thomas at safety, in addition to the guys already there like Jonas Sanker and Caleb Hardy and Ethan Minter. But another veteran that I want to kind of just discuss real quickly is Brian Stevens at center. We talked about him a little bit earlier in the show. We heard from him. I still say that was the best recruiting win Virginia had this offseason, having him come back.
They were struggling at that position, frankly. They slid him over. He hadn't really played the position previously, and he did a very good job. I think Pro Football Focus rated him as the 4th highest graded center in the whole country last year when he took over the position, which is quite the feat. And then you see Brian Stevens now. He's been being considered an NFL draft prospect. He's on the Senior Bowl watch list. He's on the East-West Shrine Game watch list. So he's someone that not only elevated Virginia's offensive line and gives them hope they can build on what they did. I think, Jacquie, they had a really good stretch middle of the year. Once they kind of got in a groove from like William and Mary through the Duke game, I would say that was probably their best stretch, and they averaged, over 160 rushing yards a game. If they can find that and elevate and continue to grow, I think they'll be better. But to get back to Stevens, his move not only helped Virginia, but it helped himself too become an NFL type prospect. I think maybe the larger concern in the running game, because you think that offensive line will be better going into its second season with the same 5 starters and second season with Terry Heffernan as the position coach, who the players just rave about. I think the bigger concern is, do they have enough depth at running back, right? I mean, I don't know how you feel, but just looking at the backfield at this point, it's Kobe Pace and a lot of guys who don't have a lot of experience. I know Xavier Brown played as a freshman, but it seems like Jack Greasy's going to be the primary backup, and they're doing everything they can, the coaching staff, to get those inexperienced running backs ready. I don't know what your take is, but I think if there's one position that has some questions on offense entering the year, it's probably the running back spot behind Kobe Pace. you can see them in practice, Jacquie. Like, you can see how diligent they are with those second, third, like potential backups at running back. You see Coach Gaither and Mike Hollins, who's a grad assistant now at the team, just drilling them and really being super focused and intentional about the way they're teaching them. I was watching them on Monday during Virginia's last open portion of practice to the media during training camp, and you could see the effort and the attention to detail that's being shown. So it certainly has the attention of the coaching staff. It's just a matter of will it play out. And that's college football, right? You lose players every year. You have positions that are weaker due to inexperience. And Virginia's got that question at running back, but they're going to try to figure it out on the fly behind Kobe Pace. And they're going to have to keep him healthy. So other backs are going to have to rotate in, whether it's Greasy or Brown or Noah Vaughn if he can get healthy, or even Dante Hawthorne is a bigger, more physical back in maybe some goal line spots.
Well, Greg, we started off the show with you talking about Anthony Colandrea winning that quarterback starting role, and he gets the keys to an offense that has a number of potential targets, not only in the wide receiver room, which they were able to add Chris Tyree, Trell Harris, and Andre Green Jr., in addition to the wide receivers they already had, like Malachi Fields and J.R. Wilson when he eventually comes back, and obviously Sudarian Harrison. But they also added tight ends to the offense, Tyler Neville and Sage Ennis, with Sackett Wood coming back. This is the first time we can say that Virginia was able to kind of adjust their offense, and that's something that Des Kitching said. He was able to adjust a little bit his offense to the personnel to finally have tight ends, which is something that this staff has missed since, honestly, since Jelani Woods left. That's probably been the last time that Virginia had such a mismatch or such a tight end mismatch. So Anthony Colandrea has a variety of targets he can throw the ball to.
Yeah, I think the tight end is something that Virginia needed to upgrade and had been wanting to upgrade since Tony Elliott and Des Kitchings got to UVA, and they were putting together what their offense would look like. They wanted a little bit more dynamic option in the passing game, and I think Neville, was two-time first-team All-Ivy League selection, give that to them. Ennis, given his tie to Tony Elliott coming in from Clemson, and having played for Elliott and was in Elliott's tight end room when Elliott was the OC and tight ends coach at the very end of his run at Clemson, understands what he wants out of that position. So I think you have a little bit more capability there, and then you throw in Sackett Wood and what he can do with the blocking aspect and maybe being a little bit involved in the passing game. But they just have more options and more athleticism than they had at that position. And it's really a trend you're seeing around the ACC, Jacquie. I think it was 12 of the 17 teams brought in at least one transfer tight end this offseason, and that position's become valued because teams, with the way the passing game is going in college football, teams want to have an extra different type of matchup they can play against opposing defenses, and that's what Virginia feels like they have now in Neville and Ennis. And I think too, just to go back to your point about Trell Harris, he came in with little fanfare, right? It was a lot about Chris Tyree and Andre Green because they were coming back to their home state from Notre Dame and North Carolina, respectively, while Trell Harris, coming in from a MAC program, underrated, under-recruited kind of his whole life. He's from the Chicago area and finally gets his crack at a power conference program. I think he's done a good job trying to make the most of his practice reps and earn some playing time. So I think he's going to certainly be a factor for them out wide. They'll probably play him opposite of Malachi Fields. You have Harris on one side, Fields on the other, and Tyree and then Sudarian Harrison in the slot would be my guess of how they line it up with the receivers.
All right, Greg, we're shifting away from stuff on the field and going right in projection mode. Schedule. Virginia, across the board, most people have them winning about 4.5 games, including Vegas. So just shy of that bowl game. You and me are, I don't know if we're just built optimistic or we're glass half full, but we see a path for Virginia that could you have predicting an over the 4.5 games?
I think the first half, the sense of optimism comes if they can get off to a great start. I think that needs to be clear. If they start strong, they give themselves a chance in the second half to steal a win or two and get to bowl eligibility, right? The first half of the schedule seems more manageable, right? You have Richmond, an FCS program. Then you go to Wake, which was 1-7 in the ACC a season ago. You got a home game at Maryland. I know Maryland won by a couple of touchdowns last year, but that game was close in the fourth quarter, and Virginia had a chance before Calandra threw the interception in the end zone, and things kind of spiraled on the Hoos in that late in that game. Trip to Coastal Carolina could be tricky, but that's a team, group of 5 program that Virginia should beat, right? You don't want to start, marking wins and losses on the schedule, but that's one the Cavaliers, frankly, should win, even though it's on the road against the Chanticleers, who have been a really good program in the Sun Belt Conference. Boston College has a new coach in Bill O'Brien. A bulk of that team is back, including the quarterback Thomas Castellanos. But that again, winnable game. That was a chance Virginia had last year, led by 2 touchdowns at halftime before squandering the lead in the second half at BC last year. So you're not looking at any of those games and saying Virginia is totally undervalued and the weaker team of the two. The other team has too many good players. None of those first 5 games scream that to me. But in the second half of the schedule, so if you can start strong, whether that's 3-2, 4-1, you give yourself a chance in those last 7 games to be competitive and get some momentum and maybe beat some teams that are perceived, at least going into the year, as a little better than Virginia. So that's where my optimism comes from, because if you don't start strong, then it gets tough, because that second half is brutal with trips to Clemson and Notre Dame and Virginia Tech and even a trip to Pitt. Not easy.
Yeah, I mean, the first 5 games, right, are going to be crucial for UVA, and they will determine how this season will go for UVA. There's no doubt about it. I mean, for me, my optimism is, I guess, like you, it's kind of like if they win 4 of the 5 games to start off, I can see a path to a bowl game. When you look at the schedule, that's how the schedule is it's constructed. You have to win 4 out of 5. Love if they win 5 games in order to help their probability of getting to the bowl game. But winning 4 of 5 will certainly help their cause. When you look at the second half stretch, right? You have at Clemson, you have at Notre Dame, you have at Pitt, you have at Virginia Tech, you have UNC at home, you have Louisville at home. So there's a lot of tougher matchups in that second half and a lot of tougher road games. I mean, they finished the season on the road 3 out of 4 games. That's their last stretch, last third of the season. So that is definitely a hard stretch for UVA. And I know you and me disagree a little bit in this because you have a different thought process, and you're going to probably discuss it afterwards, since we discuss this quite often when we talk to each other. Normally, I won't say that, hey, there's one game that will make it or break in the season, especially when it's so early on. So I'm not going to say it's a make it or break it game, but I do think the second game of the season at Wake Forest does not make it or break it, but it will tell us more about this team, and it will kind of adjust at least my expectations over this team. Wake Forest only won 1 ACC game last season. I know this is to be a road game for Virginia, but they beat UNC at Chapel Hill last year. Now, I think when you look at Wake Forest, this is a potential for this team to secure 2 wins in a row. When you're looking at trying to win 4 out of 5 games or win the first 5 games and looking at that schedule, that game can really make your season by creating that momentum forward. So again, it's not a make it or break it game for me, but I just had that circled as a game that could potentially kickstart Virginia into this run, because right afterwards you have Maryland at home. Now, I know last year Virginia lost to Maryland, but I feel like there's so many variables when it came to that game against the Terps last year in College Park. That was the first game Brian Stevens was moved to center. this was the first time he was playing center since, I believe his dad said he played center once in high school. So this is a huge adjustment for him. This was also Anthony Calandria still adjusting to being the starter. I mean, I still remember, Greg, when we were at College Park, seeing Tony Muskett warming up there before the game. And I believe the broadcasters even said that possibly Muskett was starting. It was kind of confusing because we were on the field and we hadn't seen Tony Muskett since the opening starts of warm-ups. We only saw Anthony Calandria. So there was a lot of variables there. This is a team that was still adjusting, offensive line that wasn't quite the offensive line that we saw in the later part of the season. A lot of injuries still. I mean, I think that this is the first opportunity we saw a lot of true freshmen on the defensive side of the ball. And in the end, it was also a special teams player. I believe Maryland either had a punt return or a kickoff return scored for a touchdown. Anthony Calandria had those interceptions. So a lot of variables. So you can kind of knock it as an inexperienced team with a lot of new faces and a lot of different scenarios. So I can see that could be a 50-50 game. So again, that Wake Forest game, I feel like if you're going to try to create momentum going into at Maryland for a home game, you're trying to create that moving forward.
First four, I look at the first five and I see that stretch with Wake, Maryland, Coastal, that's a crucial stretch to me. You can't give those games away. You need to win probably two of those three to give yourself a shot. That to me is the crucial stretch. I know everybody looks at the Wake game as kind of the turning point. I think it's more than that because one game, shouldn't make or break your season. I think that stretch though could make or break Virginia's season because it's three games they probably feel like they can win and might feel like they should win. So you can't start to give those games away and be in the month of September and you're looking at 1-3 or 2-2. Then you don't feel as good about your chances.
Yeah, and I think one thing when you look at the schedule is that, Greg, we always plan on which road games we're going, how we're going to approach it. So I was looking through the season trying to see when I have to tell my husband that he's going to be left alone with two kids for the weekend. And I was noticing that every 4 weeks you get a bye week. So Virginia's schedule is split nicely into thirds. And it's split nicely in a way where they'll be flying to at Coastal Carolina, and then there's a bye week. And then they'll have Boston College at home, and then they'll play, and the last game that they'll play is UNC at home, and then they'll have another bye week, and then they'll have that tough stretch of 3 road games in 4. So it feels like the bye weeks are timed really well, able to keep Virginia more fresh.
I mean, you go 4 weeks and then you get a week off. It's perfect. The season's perfectly chopped up into thirds. And then from there you can, you can rest and recover. You basically play for a month, you're off. You play for a month, you're off, and you play for a month, and then it's the end of the season. So you've got time to rest and recoup, and they're going to need it. You look at that middle stretch won't be easy, and that end of the season stretch won't be easy, especially at the end of the year when your 3 or last 4 are on the road, including a trip to South Bend. So, the way the bye weeks break up is pretty favorably.
And I mentioned it earlier, but, that bye week that's right after UNC and right before that big stretch where you have at Notre Dame, you have at Pitt, you have at Virginia Tech, and you have SMU at home. That having that break right before then is going to be huge for Virginia because you're thinking they're going to want to reach 6 games, and the way the schedule is, and I'm doing a game by game prediction for Friday on Wahoo's 24/7. But when I looked at that schedule, I thought UNC and SMU were 2 of the most likely games that they could win in the second half. Or at Pitt. So you're trying to think they might get 1 of those 3, 2 of those 3. So you want to make sure that you're ready to go for that home stretch. So having that bye week just after UNC and then into that last few games will certainly help.
Yeah, they can put all their energy and go into that as much as they need to because then they'll have the next week off. So I like the way their schedule sets up. They just you can't be the thing that was tough about last year for them is, they were 0-5 before they got before playing William. The season was already, almost over at that point, right? The bowl chances were so slim. Like, you just can't have a repeat of that, I think, if you're UVA this year. Like, you got to keep yourself relevant. And I think if you start strong, you give yourself more of a chance to stay relevant from start to finish, at least in your fans' eyes, with the potential of a bowl trip. This team hasn't participated in a bowl game since 2019. They were invited to that Fenway Bowl a couple of years ago, but it was canceled due to COVID. So they haven't played in a bowl game, haven't participated in a bowl game since the Orange Bowl in 19. So that would be a huge accomplishment for this team if they can get there, considering what the program has been through the last few years. When you talk about the coaching change, Bronco Mendenhall's quick departure, Tony Elliott's arrival, some transfer portal exodus after Elliott arrived, particularly on the offensive line, what it took to rebuild the front and restock the roster for what this coaching staff needed to fit their schemes and their offense and defense. And then you throw in the horrific tragedy a couple of years ago, November 2022, and the shooting on campus at UVA. Like, there's been a lot that's been difficult for this program. So a bowl game, and a lot of people see the six win mark is kind of the bare minimum of accomplishment in college football. That would be a mega step for this program, I think. And that's what makes, college football special. Everybody's aspirations and goals and hopes can be a little different, and what a sense of accomplishment is could be a little different. I think 6 wins would be a huge boost for this team.
Greg, I'm putting you on the spot. Do you believe Virginia at 4.5 games, which is what Vegas has? Do you believe under it or over it?
I'll say they'll go over the 4.5. I have them in the 5 to 6 win range at this point. I think that they'll probably play well enough to give themselves a shot in the second half, but I'll probably top it out at 5 wins.
I agree, Greg. I kind of hinted at this as we went along. I think Virginia is a 5-6 win team. I can even see 7 if things really go their way. Just because that second half of the season, I mean, those road games are tough, but I can see a path for a bowl game for Virginia. So I'm seeing that. I agree with for a 5-6 game stance there as well. So, Greg, thank you so much for joining us and helping us break everything down.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, Jackie.
Well, that's it for our first episode of this season. Like I said in the top of the show, we are doing this weekly again. Like I said, I didn't want to start this off again without guaranteeing that there will be a weekly episode, but we're back. I feel great, and I'm ready to roll for football season. And of course, we'll still have content on Wahoo's 24/7 coming up. Like I said, I have an interview with Eric Ward talking about the game day changes, what fans are supposed to be expected this season, and also for that home game coming up. We'll also have our Cavs Confidential because Virginia is hosting visitors. It's the first home game, which means recruits are going to be on grounds, including a top 24/7 offensive line and a big-time defensive back target. So, again, all this is coming on Wahoo's 24/7. And obviously, today is Fan Appreciation Day on Virginia 24/7. So if you want to go over there and check on wahoos247.com so you can check out what our content is, feel free to go over today. It is our Fan Appreciation Day, so you're able to see some of that VIP content as well. Then we'll be running our 75% off sale later on. So again, a great opportunity to check out the content at Wahoo's 24/7. But for right now, hope you guys have a good rest of your Thursday, and I hope you guys enjoy the first football weekend.